Business news now, and it's a deja vu all over again in the UK. After the chaos and ethical allegations that plagued Boris Johnson's government, his successor, Rishi Sunak, faces questions of his own. Party leader Nadhim Zahawi will be investigated after widespread reports of potential tax payment irregularities. And that's not the only headache for Mr. Sunak. His government will also probe the conduct of the chairman of the BBC, who is reported to have intervened in Mr. Johnson's financial arrangements before his appointment to the nation's leading broadcaster. All of this while Labour strikes plague the country. Yet Mr. Sunak seems unperturbed at a meeting with medical workers earlier today.
Integrity and accountability is really important to me, and clearly in this case there are questions that need answering, and that's why I've asked our independent advisor to get to the bottom of everything, to investigate the matter fully and establish all the facts and provide advice to me on Nadhim Zahawi's compliance with the ministerial code. I'm pleased that Nadhim Zahawi has agreed with that approach and has agreed to fully cooperate with that investigation.
That's Rishi Sunak, who's the UK Prime Minister, but the leader of the opposition Labour Party was absolutely scathing in his assessment of Mr. Sunak's decision to keep Mr. Zahawi in office during the inquiry.
That Zahawi can't stay as Tory party chair. The very idea that he can be discussing and negotiating his own tax affairs with the body that he's supposed to be running. Everybody knows it's wrong. He clearly isn't going to resign, and so the Prime Minister needs to show some leadership. This is a test of the Prime Minister. He promised us, his first words, integrity and accountability. Well, if those words mean anything, the Prime Minister should sack him, and sack him today, and show some leadership. Because if he doesn't, it's just going to be further evidence, I think, for the British public as to just how weak this Prime Minister really is.
And that's Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the UK opposition Labour Party. Let's cross over to London, where Arise business correspondent Laurie Laird is standing by with the latest. Good to see you, Laurie. Tell us more about this investigation and the circumstances behind it, and how serious all this is for Rishi Sunak.
Well, let's start from your last question. I think this is very, very serious for Rishi Sunak, but let's go through exactly what these accusations are. And it has been a very busy day for Rishi Sunak in terms of deflecting various things that have various accusations coming against his government. But I think the one that is most pressing are these tax accusations against Nadhim Zahawi. Now, Nadhim Zahawi has been around government in various positions for a couple of years now. First entered Parliament in 2010, first got a junior ministerial position in 2017, but really came to prominence as the man who led the vaccination drive, helped with the development of the COVID vaccination in the UK, and then getting that distributed. So he came out of that period of time, one of the ministers who came out of that period with his reputation actually enhanced. Now, it's never been a secret that he comes from a very wealthy family, or was made a lot of money himself. I was a little misleading there. Backstory is fascinating with this man. He is an Iraqi Kurd. His family fled Iraq when he was 9 years old. He arrived in the UK with not a word of English, studied very hard, studied chemical engineering here in London, became a businessman, and founded the polling organization YouGov, which when he left was thought to be worth around $100 million. Now, there have always been some questions about his tax affairs, some questions about money that has been held in offshore accounts, and whether that money was taxed, whether it was allowed to be in his name or his father's name, and whether it came into the UK in the first instance, and whether it was taxed after that. Now, allegations are that Nadhim Zahawi did have to pay some back taxes to the tax authorities here. And what seems to have been emerging over the past couple of days is that he did pay a sum of about £4 million, which included 30% of that was actually a penalty for late payment. Now, here's when things get even more sticky. Not only have there been accusations that he did not pay his taxes on time, but at the time that he was settling his tax affairs, it is possible that he was serving as Chancellor of the Exchequer, a role he held. That's essentially finance secretary here. Held that role for a couple of months after Rishi Sunak left it during the dying days of Boris Johnson's premiership. If he settled those affairs while he was Chancellor, that means he was talking about his tax affairs with HMRC, the Treasury, the tax collecting operation, which is part of the Treasury. So he was essentially could have been settling his tax affairs with his underlings. And that's where things get a little bit messy.
And of course, Laurie, this comes at a time when the British government is already under pressure on a number of different fronts. I mean, there's another problem with the chairman, a row over the appointment of the chairman of the BBC. What are the details there?
Absolutely. And Rishi Sunak was questioned about this today. And he was at a meeting with hospital workers. Believe me, the last thing he wanted to talk about was ethics. He did say, look, this problem with the chair, the appointment of the chair of the BBC was not on my watch. And that is true. It was Boris Johnson's government and ministers there that did appoint a man called Richard Sharp to be chair of the BBC. But the Sunday Times came out with a report over the weekend, and it was a very detailed report, very credible, that in fact, Richard Sharp was part of a group of people that arranged a loan for Boris Johnson, could have been as much as £800,000. Apparently, Boris Johnson was going through a bit of a tax flow problem. Richard Sharp is accused of having introduced him to someone who then guaranteed a loan. At the time that Richard Sharp is accused of doing so, he had already put his hat in the ring to be chief executive of the BBC. So it's hard to escape, if this is the case, it's hard to escape that he was putting money into government and ending up with a very, very high profile job, that it was arranged by the government. Regardless of how this ends, we do know that Richard Sharp has been a big contributor to the Conservative Party over the years. Rishi Sunak is right when he says this happened not on my watch, Gov. However, it certainly is his responsibility to ensure that something's done about it.
Well, we'll have to watch and see how all this affects Mr. Sunak's ability to govern. Laurie, thanks very much indeed. Laurie Laird, Arise business correspondent, talking to me there from London. You've been watching Arise News Hour with me, Charles Enyegolu. Please keep it here on Arise News from the entire team here in Abuja, London, and around the world. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.